Scene 25, Funscape Nights. By the middle of July, Funscape had become our spot. Every Friday and Saturday night, one of us would make a few calls, and before long, we'd all end up there. It didn't matter if we had money or not. Somebody always had enough for a game card, a movie ticket, or a round of laser tag. The place had everything: arcades, movies, laser tag, duck bowling, go karts. For a bunch of teenagers with access to cars for the first time, it was heaven. Most nights started the same way. Frankie would pull up blasting music through those subs like he was trying to shake the paint off the blazer. Mitch would be talking trash before we even got out the truck. CeeLo would already be scanning the parking lot looking for girls. One Friday night, we met up around 8. It seemed like everybody in northern Delaware had discovered Funscape at the same time. Go-karts first, Mitch announced. Why, Frankie asked. So I could beat y'all. Man, shut up. 20 minutes later, Mitch was celebrating like he had won the Indy 500. I told y'all. You barely won, I said. A win is a win. After that, we hit the arcade and laser tag. Like always, we took laser tag way too seriously. Other groups showed up trying to have fun. We showed up trying to dominate. By the time we finished, everybody was sweating and talking trash. We ended up hanging around near the duck bowling lanes while we decided whether we were going to catch a movie. That's when I saw Virginia. At first, I wasn't even sure it was her. She was walking toward the arcade holding hands with some dude. I had never seen him before. My eyes followed them longer than I wanted them to. Damn, Frankie said beside me. What? That ain't Virginia? I nodded. The crazy part was I wasn't even mad. A year earlier, seeing something like that would have ruined my whole night. Now, it just felt strange. Like I was looking into a chapter of my life that had already ended. She looked happy, and honestly, I had no reason to be upset. We hadn't been together. We had barely even spoken in months. Still, a small part of me felt something. Not heartbreak, just acceptance. As if life was reminding me that people keep moving whether you're ready or not. Before I could think too much, Mitch pointed toward the bowling lanes. Yo, Ace. I turned, and there was Rhonda. She was laughing with some dude, not just talking. They were clearly together. Frankie started laughing. Ain't this some shit? I couldn't help but laugh too. Last year, Virginia and Rhonda were two of the biggest crushes I had. Now, here they both were on the same night with other people. It almost felt planned. Guess that chapter is over too, I said. Been over, CeeLo replied. We all laughed. The funny thing was, CeeLo was right. That chapter had been over. I just hadn't realized it yet. The rest of the night was a blur. More games, more trash talk. A movie. Music playing as we stood in the parking lot before we headed home. Looking back, that night wasn't important because I saw Virginia and Rhonda with somebody else. It was important because of how little it bothered me. For the first time, I wasn't looking backward. I was finally starting to look ahead. Scene 26, first day back. Junior year arrived quietly. Somehow, just another August morning felt different from every other August before it. Frankie pulled in the William Penn parking lot with the music blasting and one hand hanging out the window like he owned the place. You ready? Nah, not really. Good, me neither. I laughed and grabbed my book bag. The parking lot was already packed. Students moved in clusters, laughing louder than they needed to, showing off fresh sneakers and brand new confidence. The girls walked like they knew people were watching. The guys carried themselves like they had something to prove. Some students were driving now. Others were talking about jobs, SAT scores, and college. Frankie looked around and shook his head. I'm telling you right now, everybody came back acting grown. I laughed because he wasn't wrong. A sophomore couple walked by holding hands. A group of seniors stood near the entrance talking about graduation. One dude had a beard that looked older than both of us put together. See, Frankie said, that ain't even natural. We headed toward the building together. Inside, the hallways felt smaller than they used to, or maybe we was finally growing into them. The first half of the day passed in a blur. By lunch, I found myself sitting with Frankie while he ranked every girl he'd seen in the building. I wasn't paying much attention. My mind was somewhere else. Everybody seemed focused on something. It felt like high school had stopped being practiced. At Mount Pleasant, Mitch's day looked different. Football practice started right after the final bell. The August heat sat heavy over the field. Coach Daniel stood near midfield talking with the man none of the players recognized. Mitch jogged through drills without paying much attention. That changed when Coach called him over. Mitch! He walked over, breathing hard. Coach pointed toward the visitor. This is Mr. Harris. The man shook Mitch's hand. Been hearing good things. Mitch smiled politely and said, "Thank you, sir." The conversation lasted less than a minute. After the recruiter walked away, several players noticed. Mitch noticed too. For the first time, football wasn't just football anymore. People were watching. Across town, CeeLo walked into Wilmington High carrying himself differently than he had the last 2 years. The attention didn't surprise him anymore. It fit. At lunch, he sat surrounded by people, laughing and joking like always. But something about him had changed. CeeLo listened more than he talked now, watched more than he reacted. The older he got, the less interested he seemed to be the center of attention. Most people would have called it maturity. Looking back, I think it was something else. I think he was learning the value of influence, and those aren't always the same thing. Back at William Penn, the final bell rang. Students flooded the hallways toward freedom. I was headed toward the front entrance when somebody caught my attention. Not because she was loud, not because she was trying to be noticed. Actually, the opposite. She sat alone near a classroom reading through a notebook while the entire hallway moved past her. Focused. Completely focused. For a second, I slowed down, but she never looked up. Never noticed me. Never even knew I was standing there. Then the crowd pushed forward and the moment passed. Outside, the late afternoon sun hung over the parking lot. Junior year was only one day in, and it felt like it was definitely going to leave its mark. Honestly, I couldn't explain why. Scene 27. Amina. By October, most of our classes had settled into routines. Teachers knew who paid attention, students knew who didn't. Seats became permanent, and friend groups tightened. The noise faded into something familiar. That's how I ended up sitting across from Amina. It happened because of the group project. Nothing special. Mr. Harrison assigned 4-person groups and told us we had 3 weeks to complete a presentation. Everybody immediately started negotiating, trying to lock in friends, trying to avoid work, trying to do the least possible without getting called out. Amina didn't participate in any of that. She looked at the assignment sheet once, opened her notebook, and started writing. When someone in the group tried to joke about doing it the night before, like always, she didn't react. She just kept writing, then calmly split the topic into sections and assigned them like it was already decided. There were plenty of smart people at William Penn. Amina wasn't the smartest person I've ever met. She was one of the most intentional. Every question she asked had a purpose. Every note she wrote down led somewhere. If a conversation didn't move forward, she didn't keep it going. The first time we actually talked was after school in the library. The project wasn't due for another 2 weeks. She was already halfway finished her part. I sat down across from her. You know we got time, right? Without looking up, she smiled. I know. So why you moving like it's due tomorrow? Now she looked up, just briefly, like she was measuring whether the question was serious. Because when it's done, it's done. I leaned back in my chair. That's crazy. No, she said. Waiting until the last minute is crazy. I didn't have anything for that. We worked for a while after that. Not side by side like friends, more like two people sharing the same space. Every so often she would pause and ask something that didn't feel random. What are you doing after high school? I hesitated. I don't know yet. She didn't move on right away. Okay, she said, like that answer had weight to it. Do you like it here? William Penn. I almost gave the easy answer. Something like it's cool or it's whatever. But she was already looking at me like she'd hear the real version anyway. Not really, I finally said. She didn't react, just wrote something down. That was worse somehow. Not being judged, being recorded accurately. Most people ask questions waiting their turn to talk. Amina actually listened. When I finished answering, she didn't rush to fill space. She let it sit there like it mattered. When we finally packed it up, the library was almost empty. Outside, the sun was already dropping low. Cars pulling out, kids heading home from practice. Amina adjusted her backpack. You ever think about college? She asked. It didn't feel like small talk. It felt like something she actually needed an answer to. Sometimes, I said. She nodded once. That's not really an answer. I almost said something defensive. Something about it was complicated. The way people act like it's so simple. Instead, I said maybe because I don't really got one. That made her pause for a fraction, longer than anything else had. Fair enough. She walked toward the parking lot like the conversation was complete. Amina, I called, breaking her stride. Yes, she answered back. What are you doing this weekend? I asked. No plans, she stated simply. Let's go to the Mount Pleasant football game. My cousin plays for them. That sounds cool, she stated. I'll meet you there, as she continued walking. I sat back a second longer than I needed, watching her walk away. The project wasn't what stuck with me. It was the way she asked questions like she expected them to go somewhere, and the way mine didn't. At 16 years old, that difference felt like it mattered more than it should have. Scene 28, Friday Night Lights. Seems like before I knew it, Friday was here. I confirmed with Amina that we were meeting up at Mount Pleasant, and we'd wait for each other to go inside. As she walked off, Frankie walked up and asked, Who is that? My eyes never left her as I replied, That's Amina. I could feel Frankie watching me as I broke my stare and looked at him in the eye. He had a look on his face that said, Are you okay? What time you picking me up for the game? On time, Frankie replied, which simply meant you will hear me when I'm pulling up. As we arrived at Mount Pleasant, I saw Amina standing in front of the gate waiting. Frankie said, "Oh man, I didn't know it was date night tonight." I simply ignored it. We walked up to the game and ran dead into CeeLo. He was standing with Angie and Kai. As I started to introduce Amina, it seemed like every bit of my whole family walked up. By this point in the season, Mitch was must-see. Mount Pleasant was 5-0, and Mitch had 100 yards rushing every game, plus he had a 200-yard game in there. This week wasn't a regular week, though. They were playing a surprising team for the year, also undefeated at 5-0, Dickinson High. The number one defense in the state so far that year, giving up only 35 points over 5 games. A young team, no seniors on defense, led by a sophomore, my little cousin Kenny. After all long introductions, we found our seats. Amina leans in and says, "I didn't know this was a meet your family affair," smiling as she leaned back. "I told you my cousin plays for Mount Pleasant." She asked which one. I told her Mitch and pointed at him. She didn't follow football, so she had no clue how good of a game that she was about to watch. My cousin Kenny plays for the other team too. He number 36. The stadium lights had fully taken over by then, turning the field into something brighter than the rest of the city. The crowd was bigger than I expected. Students packed one side, parents packed another. The band played loud enough to drown out conversations for a few minutes. Somebody would point toward the field and mention Mitch's name. Amina noticed too. "Your cousin famous or something?" I laughed. "Something like that." The teams finally took the field, and the noise doubled. Mount Pleasant came out first. The home crowd exploded. Mitch jogged through the tunnel with the rest of the team, helmet tucked under one arm before putting it on. Even from the stands, he looked different. Dickinson followed. I immediately spotted Kenny. Amina squinted toward the field. "That's Kenny?" "Yeah." She looked confused. "I thought you said he was one of their best players." "He is." "He's little." Frankie, CeeLo, and I laughed. Everybody says that. The truth was, Kenny wasn't supposed to be doing what he was doing. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the fastest. Wasn't even an upperclassman. But somehow, every Friday night, he found himself around the football. The opening kickoff sailed in the end zone, and the game was underway. From the first drive, it was obvious that this wasn't going to be a normal game. Mitch ripped off a 15-yard run for his first carry. Then another. The crowd got loud immediately. By the end of the drive, Mount Pleasant was already threatening to score. Then Dickinson's defense tightened up. Every yard became difficult. Every hole disappeared faster. Every mistake got punished. Kenny wasn't making every tackle, but he seemed involved in everything. Before the snaps, he was pointing teammates into position. After the snap, he somehow knew where the ball was going. Some players relied on talent. Kenny relied on understanding. "Yo," Frankie said, "little cousin's nice." I nodded. He always been smart. He always understood the game. The game settled into a dogfight. Big hits, punts, field position. The kind of game old heads love. By halftime, Dickinson was leading 10-7. Mina nudged me. "You weren't kidding," she said. "This is a good game." I told you. "Are those actual scouts over there?" I looked around and noticed them too. Men with clipboards, school jackets, and notebooks watching every snap, especially when Mitch touched the ball. A few rows down, Angie sat with Kai and some of the family members. She looked calm, but I knew better. Every carry and every hit, her eyes followed all of it. The third quarter belonged to Mitch. He broke tackles, dragged defenders, turned short gains into first downs. Midway through the quarter, he burst through a hole and raced nearly 50 yards before being pushed out of bounds. The crowd exploded. 2 plays later, Mount Pleasant scored, 17-10. The stadium shook, but Dickinson answered. Then Mount Pleasant answered. Back and forth, neither team willing to break. By the fourth quarter, nobody was sitting down anymore. The score was tied 24-24. Every possession felt important. Every mistake felt huge. Then came the play everybody talked about afterward. Mount Pleasant got the ball just over 3 minutes left. Mitch carried them down the field almost by himself. 6 yards, 9 yards, 12 yards. The crowd got louder with every touch. The ball crossed midfield into Dickinson territory, then down to the 30. Everybody could feel it. One more big play. That's all they needed. Mitch took a handoff and hit the hole hard. For a second, it looked over. The line opened perfectly as he burst through untouched. The crowd rose as one. 20 yards, then 30. Nothing but green grass. Touchdown. At least that's what everybody thought. Then number 36 appeared. Kenny took the perfect angle, the kind of angle you could only take when you already seen the play before it happens. He closed the distance and launched himself. The collision echoed through the stadium. Mitch stayed on his feet for another few steps before stumbling out of bounds inside the 10-yard line. The Dickinson sideline erupted. The Mount Pleasant crowd groaned. Mitch and Kenny barking at each other face to face. I couldn't help but smile. This was my family out there. 3 plays later, Dickinson came up with a goal line stand. No touchdown. No points. Stadium silent. Dickinson got the ball back and drove just enough to drain the clock. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read, Dickinson 27, Mount Pleasant 24. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Mitch stood near midfield with his hands on his hips, helmet off, just staring. Kenny walked over first. No celebrating, no trash talk, just respect. They hugged briefly before heading to their sidelines. That somehow meant more than the trash talk. As the crowd started filing out, we made our way toward the fence where players met their families. Recruiters stood everywhere, talking to coaches, talking to parents. One of them approached Angie. He introduced himself and pointed toward Mitch. Your son got a future. Angie smiled politely, but I saw it. The quick blink, the moisture in her eyes, the look she tried to hide. Kai wrapped an arm around her without saying anything. For everybody else, Dickinson had won the game. For Angie, something bigger had happened. For the first time, she was being forced to imagine a future where Mitch didn't belong to Wilmington anymore. And standing there watching it all, I realized something too. Mitch lost the game, but somehow his world got even bigger.